Hello, and welcome to our week on the Psalms. We will only be reading one book and just a little bit of textbook reading this week. So it's a light week for you, and I hope you enjoy that time focusing on these prayers and songs. The book of Psalms is made up of 150 prayers and songs, as you will see. It's one of the most personal books in the Bible, and the one which people turn to the most often as religious people, because it has a lot of emotion in it, as you will see. There's songs of gratitude, songs of praise, songs of lament. In most cases, the titles of the Psalms, as you will see, are related to different individuals who are connected to them. Many of them are connected to David, about 73 of them. And traditionally, the Psalms were said to have been written by David, although, as you will see, historically, that's not accurate. 12 of them are dedicated to Asaph, 2 to Solomon, 1 to Moses, etc. So the history and poetry of the Psalms. Psalms and psalm-like hymns existed and were common in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Syro-Canaanite literature prior to Judaism. And we know these texts from a site which is now in Syria, which is the Canaanite Psalms, which were written sometime between 1400 and 1200 BCE. The psalmists then adopted this formal system of poetry from this literature and also used their imagery. There are elements of mythology you will find, and sometimes whole lines of poetry taken from these polytheistic psalms. There's a strong link to Canaanite pagan tradition, and some of them are linked very much to the Canaanite god Baal, to the Council of Gods, other things that you find in Canaanite religion, but then they are transferred and made into monotheistic poetry, as you will see. The anthology of the Psalms, the bringing together of all these Psalms together, seems to have happened sometime in the Second Temple period, perhaps around the 5th century BCE, but no later than the 4th century BCE. This comes about probably when the Torah is redacted in the 5th century BCE as a canonical book meant for public reading. The collection, as you will see, is divided into 5 sections, 5 books. We have chapters 1 through 41, 42 through 72, etc. Psalms 1 and 2 are considered a prologue to the book of Psalms as a whole and not part of the collection. There are duplications of the Psalms twice. We have Psalm 14 and 53, which are the same, and part of 40 and 70, which are the same. And they are found in different books of the collection, which shows us that they existed separately at first. While you're going to read about the different genres of Psalms, royal, Zion, praise, etc., do remember that these categories are fluid and that many of the Psalms are hybrids and that you could put them into several categories. And some, such as Psalm 137, stand completely outside of this system of genres that was created by theologians and historians to discuss the Psalms. In terms of the poetry of the Psalms, you will see that there is no rhyme or regular meter. Benjamin Hroshovsky actually calls it semantic, syntactic, accentual parallelism, and you will be reading about parallelism in your textbook. By semantic, he means that there's some equivalence of meaning. Accentual means that there's the same number of stressed syllables, and syntactic means that there's the same syntax. So it doesn't have to have all 3, however. Here's an example from Psalm 6. Lord, do not chastise me in your wrath. Do not punish me in your fury. Have mercy on me, Lord, for I am wretched. Heal me, for my limbs are stricken. So you see here that we have in the second line the development, and it's an idea of parallelism here. The same ideas being said over in a different way. We also find in the Psalms images are repeated over and over, lots of imagery around water, as you will see. Sometimes translation is problematic in the Psalms, and depending on what translation you use, you'll see that there's a lot of different translations. Translation of poetry is always complex, as you know. So here's an example of how translation is difficult from Psalm 69. The King James Version says, "Save me, O God, for the waters are coming in unto my soul." However, if you read the Hebrew and translate it more literally, it says, "For the waters have come up to my neck." Right? So we have this language of the body that's used systematically throughout the Hebrew poetry that's often then translated in a more less bodily way in the King James and other translations. Just something to be aware of. So Jewish use of the Psalms. The Psalms are central in Jewish family and social life by the Second Temple period. And as seen in 4 Maccabees, later on in our semester, where there's description of singing of the Psalms. There's also many fragments of the Psalms found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they're discussed in great depth in the rabbinic literature. In rabbinic Judaism, Psalms were not regarded, however, as prayers. They were seen as prophetic texts, material to study and thus to be said. They certainly were used in temple times. The Mishnah remembers that the Levites sang a special psalm each day. During Talmudic times and throughout the medieval period, there was a common fear, as there was throughout the medieval world, of demons and other malevolent forces. And so Psalms were often recited as protection against them. Psalms 31 and 21, 3, I'm sorry, and 21 in the Talmud were useful attacks against demons and were included in liturgical practice, especially useful at times where demons might take charge, such as during illness or funerals. Psalms 15 and 17 in the 4th book of Psalms have core functions in Jewish liturgy. And the 4th book of Psalms is the one that is most used during Jewish services. This is perhaps because of the mention of Moses in those Psalms. So Christians take on the Psalms and their use by the 2nd century when they enter the Christian liturgy. In the 7th century, we have the development of Gregorian chant, beginning with Pope Gregory I, in which the Psalms are sung liturgically and incorporated within monastic life. Monks pray 6 times a day, and each prayer is linked to a psalm, so that they go through the whole cycle of 150 psalms every week. The Book of Hours, which you see an example of here on the right, were Christian prayer books, and where people could also pray during the canonical hours, just as the monks did. And they are the most common illustrated manuscript that we still have of the Middle Ages, because so many people had them. They were small books that you could carry around. And again, these included psalms and prayers so that everybody would know the psalms and would go through them in a regular cycle. In 17th century England, we take the Gregorian chant tradition and it is turned into Anglican plain song. This is a kind of antiphonal song singing by choirs and in public worship, and it's sung without any accompaniment. The rhythm is fixed not with a meter, as we see in other kinds of music, but rather with the cadence of the psalms themselves. And I've given you an example of that in the optional material for this week. The Psalms continue to be used as time goes on. The first book published in America, in Boston in 1640, is a book of Psalms, showing us that it is still very central to worship at the time. Anglicans bring the tradition of plain song to the US with the Episcopal Church, right? Chanting recitation of the Psalms, and the Puritans then develop their own way of singing the Psalms. In the 19th and 20th century, however, we've had a move away from just singing the Psalms with the advent of gospel music, so that we have devotional lyrics that are set to folk melodies, which are often paraphrases of the Psalms, but are not the Psalms themselves in the same way. Vatican II, the council in the 1960s that changed and renewed the Catholic Church, also brings a renewal of the use of Psalms during scripture readings, where we have psalms, which are sung by both congregation and cantors. So as you see, the Psalms have an intimate use in the life of worship for both Jews and Christians from very early on until the present day. I hope you enjoy reading Psalms this week and delving into a few of them in more depth.